There's a war of genocide that the ignorance of Europe and Asia is allowing them, for the sake of trying not to be faced with genetic annihilation, has allowed them to concoct ways of murdering us. I mean, we can go to the syphilis experiments at Tuskegee, or we can go to the AIDS in Africa. I mean, look at this thing in Africa where we got AIDS, and so everybody in Africa, all of a sudden, some of the first we saw popped up in New York City in the homosexual community, now it pops up in Africa, and tens of millions of people have got it, and the pharmaceutical company is going crazy selling them drugs that they have to stay on for perpetuity. Billions and billions, if not trillions of dollars, you are guaranteed, because all these Africans have to take this medicine for the rest of their life. Give me a break. You tell me the guy who enslaved me, the guy who practiced colonialism against me, the guy who raped my mama, my sister, cut the testicles off my father, ripped me apart with horses, all of a sudden is going to come to my well-being and make me a medicine that's good for me, when his whole history is about profit and genocide at any cost, even if it meant killing his mother. And I'm not just talking about our European brothers and sisters as regards dealing with the black brothers and sisters. If you just read books on the Inquisition and the horror and the genocide waged against European working people and the women of Europe is so horrific, it makes even the transatlantic slave trade looks pale sometimes.
The whole AIDS hoax has been about us getting to take the medication. There's no HIV that creates AIDS. They found that the HIV is a very innocuous, very benign so-called virus and doesn't cause anything. What does cause AIDS is drugs, the taking of medications. And what created the AIDS condition in the homosexual community that came what is known as GRID, gay-related immunodeficiency, were these poppers, amyl nitrate and butyl nitrate, these things that were used for the heart to dilate the muscles. Well, the homosexual community, the one who created it into these little popping things, when you broke the seal, it made a pop, so they call them poppers. It was the inhalation of these things that began to bring down the so-called immune system of the homosexuals, and they began to have this immunodeficiency based upon overuse of this. Why did they use these poppers? Because when they used these poppers and they inhaled it, not only did they get the rush, but the anus began to dilate and relax. So the homosexuals were using this left and right. Thousands are being sold here in New York. And when they found that, they did not put in that poppers were the ones, and that drugs and these poisonous medications were creating the conditions called AIDS. They took the opportunity to ride the HIV-AIDS connection because they knew the money that would be made and that they could recruit people into believing that a heinous disease had attacked everybody. And where did it come from? Africa.
It's always wise to study your enemy. If you're going to defeat someone, you must know their strengths and their weaknesses.
People have been utilizing Africans to heal themselves for centuries. And people have been going to African shamans, African witch doctors to find cures for themselves, that Eastern medicine. So people have been going to African people to cure themselves for years.
The doctor that's given credit for a lot of the internal examinations that women go through, those instruments were first tested on women who were enslaved. And I can only imagine, well, I can't even imagine. A woman could imagine. But the kind of pain that that woman was put through to test those particular iron, steel objects that would go up through their bodies.
In the United States, what they would do with slave children, and this has been well documented, to cure rheumatism and to cure gout and to cure arthritis, they would place their feet on top of a slave child and just keep their feet there for hours, thinking that the child, the melanin, would draw out whatever sickness the slave masters would have.
Well, we know that a lot of things have happened in our hospitals. We know that experiments was used on our people in almost every city hospital in America.
Henrietta Lacks was a sister who lived in Baltimore, and who had cervical cancer, and ultimately died of cervical cancer. And the doctors harvested some of her cells, and what they discovered in performing tests on her cells were that her cells were immune to specific diseases, specific cancers. So there was a quality in her cells that was resistant to disease. And they began to develop a host of vaccines and treatment modalities using the cells of this black woman, and they never told her family that they had harvested her cells, that they had made millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars.
Henrietta Lacks' own DNA and her cells are all over the world right now because they were so prolific, they just kept on multiplying. That was an indication of the fact that as African peoples, we hold the genetics for eternal youth.